is Jeremiah's bringing the prophecies, and God's telling Jeremiah information to go and tell whom? Moabites, or the Ammonites, or the Edomites, or the other nations. Okay, so he's dealing with prophecies that are going out to other nations, particularly Moab in chapter 48. When you bounce into chapter 49, the list will get even longer, of other nations that God is telling Jeremiah of condemnation and challenges that are coming to them because of their failures in relationship to God. And so that's where we're going to pick up in our studies together this evening in relationship to these particular chapters. And as we already started on Sunday morning, in chapter 48, we're dealing with Moab. And again, who are the Moabites? Okay, they were descendants of Lot and his daughter. Which one? His oldest, right? Because we're going to deal with the younger one later. But his oldest daughter and this incestuous relationship that Lot had with her created a nation of people who eventually become known as the Moabites. And so that's who God is dealing with here, obviously many, many years later. But that's the nation of people and where they had come from that God is dealing with here in this particular text. The question sheets, and just to kind of guide us through for a moment here, because we're kind of speeding up a little bit, but remembering some of the things that we talked about on Sunday morning. From verse 7, why was this particular calamity coming to them?
Trusted in their priorities.
Okay. So they trusted in themselves and in their treasures. Now we're going to see an additional reason given later in the text. But for now, these are the basic reasons given in chapter 7, or verse 7, of why it is that God brings judgment and consequence to them. Anytime you're trusting in yourself, who are you not trusting in? God. And that's a challenge, right? That's the difficulty they have, because anytime they have failed in their relationship with God, no matter who it is, God brings consequence to that. Who is this Chemosh or Chemosh, or however you want to say it? Okay, that's their primary God. Okay, and you're going to see that. There's another one we're going to deal with, at least one more, before we're done with our study of chapter 49. But this is their primary God. And I should use a lowercase g. Well, it looks like I didn't mean to write that in cursive, but it sure looks like I did, didn't it? But which is, by the way, not even a cursive going, right? Along with sensible math. But anyway, but here's this issue here in chapter 48, where Moab's going to be judged by Jehovah, and consequences are going to come because of their behaviors. Now let's notice a few things within the text itself. I want you to jump down into verse 10. He said, "Cursed be he that doeth the work of Jehovah negligently, and cursed be he that keepeth back his sword from blood." It's an interesting kind of dynamic, because is God going to come personally and bring these condemnations and judgments against these nations? No, he's not going to do it personally. What's he going to do? He's going to use another nation. In particular, he's going to use Babylon. Okay, he's been using Babylon. Will continue to do that. And so God's not, and so he's going to challenge other groups to step up and accept responsibility to bring these judgments against these nations. And he warns them about what in verse 10? Don't be what? Don't be negligent. Okay? Don't shrink back. I've sent you to do this work. Do not shrink back from the responsibilities that I have given you. Moab has been at ease, verse 11, from his youth. He hath settled on his lees, and hath not been emptied from vessel to vessel, neither hath he gone into captivity. Now, therefore his taste remaineth in him, and his scent is not changed. What's the basic challenge, or the reason why Moab had been trusting in themselves?
They haven't had any problems.
Okay. They never had problems. They've never been tested. They've never been challenged in any way. And it appears, even from their initial beginnings as a full-out nation, they've never really been challenged. Because they've never really been challenged, they become very what? Complacent. Okay? And almost so much so that what could never happen to us?
We'll never be.
Yeah, nothing bad could ever happen to us. things have been just swimmingly since the origins of our nation. There is no way whatsoever that anything could ever challenge us. And they begin to trust in themselves more and more because of that mindset. Jump to verse 13. Moab shall be ashamed of Chemosh, as the house of Israel was ashamed of Bethel, their confidence. Why the reference to Bethel?
That's where the land was.
Right, okay. Remember in the divided kingdom, okay, they didn't want folks going back down to Jerusalem to worship because that would let Judah influence them, right? And so they created two locations, Dan and Bethel, right, in order for their people to be able to, Israel, to be able to go and to worship. And so he says, Chemosh will become like what I did to Israel and its places of worship. Their God would be brought down, and the reason for their confidences would be shattered. They would have to become recognized for the idolatrous relationship they've had with this Chemosh for a long time. Notice he said, Moab will be what to him? They ought to be ashamed. You've been trusting in this lifeless ideology for so long, and you've felt so comfortable in that, and you've built such confidence in that. And they ought to have been ashamed. And to trust in something that they had fashioned and created in their own minds and with their own hands, and now the consequences of that are beginning to come forth against them. Eventually, what's going to happen to their God?
Taken into captivity.
Okay, that's one of your questions if you go back and look for a moment. The question was asked, what would happen to their God? And I wrote the answer to that one in the wrong spot. But what's going to happen to him is that in a sense, he's going captive with them. You would think that if he's a God that's powerful and real, he could have done what? Okay, he could have stopped the captivity. Okay? Not only is, in this symbolic kind of language, not only is he incapable of saving you from this calamity, but he's going with you. I'm taking him captive right along with you. That's how powerless he is. That I not only have power over you to bring you into captivity in this kind of symbolic language, I'm taking your God right into captivity as well. There's a sense of power that Jehovah wants them to appreciate that is only found in him. Verse 17, notice with me. And all ye that are round about him, the Ammonians, speaking of Moab, and all ye that know his name, say, how is the strong staff broken, the beautiful rod? Then he will stand amazed and fall such a great place. Is any nation too big to fall? No. Is any nation too powerful to be able to not be able to be overcome? No. It never has been and never will be. No matter how powerful, no matter how strong physical nations become, all of them have eventually what? Either fallen or at least have become something far less than they once were. And so no nation should ever think for a moment, no matter how great, no matter how wonderful, no matter how beautiful it is, no nation should ever think. And that's today, yesterday, tomorrow. It doesn't matter when. What time period in the world you want to talk about. It's all the same thought. Never think of any nation too powerful to be dealt with. And anytime a nation thinks that it can't, they fit into this mold. People stood around amazed. They're looking around at Moab thinking, how did this happen? This place that had been so peaceable and so well entreated and had no real challenges even from their early nation building. And now all of a sudden they're falling into calamity and hardship. It can happen to anybody. And that's really the lesson for the nations round about for anybody. Anyone can fall. And certainly God can bring judgment against any nation as well. Thoughts up to there? So jump down. He lists a bunch of extra places, cities within Moab, inhabitants of Aror there, stand by the way and watch and ask him that fleeth. Moab is put to shame in verse 20. There's going to be crying as it's broken down, certainly great mourning at the site. Judgment has come against the plain country and all these cities that belong to Moab that are listed there through verses 25. But notice now with me verse 26. Make ye him drunken, for he magnified himself against Jehovah. And Moab shall wallow in his vomit, and he also shall be in derision. One of the things that we need to notice about Moab and the problems with Moab is that he says that they had, what had they done in relationship to Jehovah? In verse 26, let me go back to the text, you can see.
Magnified themselves.
And magnified themselves against Jehovah. It is one thing, earlier in the chapter, verse 7, that they had trusted in themselves, they were trusting in their treasures, and that judgment came because of that behavior. You add this additional thought in verse 26, that not only was it just a matter of, well, we're pretty self-reliant, and we're pretty proud about what we've done here with our great nation and all those kinds of things, but they had gone one step further and they have began to magnify themselves against Jehovah. In other words, they believe that Jehovah can't what?
Can't hurt them.
Yeah, he can't do anything to us. Jehovah is incapable of hurting us.
They're better, yeah.
Yeah. We have created a nation that is greater than anything that Jehovah could ever do. We've created a nation that's more powerful, stronger than anything God could ever cause against us. And so they're magnifying themselves in relationship with God.
Was this after the fall of Israel and Judah that they did this? Or do you know?
I believe so. I'd have to go back and
So that
guarantee
they
that.
had that to look, hey, look, the God of Judah didn't save them.
Yeah.
Our God, we're still here.
There is potential that these nations have witnessed what God has done to Israel and Judah. And rather than thinking of that as what Jehovah has done, they very easily could have thought, look what Jehovah could not stop. And so because of that, there very easily could be this magnifying of themselves against Jehovah, thinking, why should we be afraid of the God of Judah and Israel any longer? Because he apparently wasn't even powerful enough to keep Babylon away. And so there could be that kind of thinking as well. Notice in the question from verse 29. He asked, what had been heard of Moab, according to verse 29?
Pride.
Pride and
Okay.
arrogance.
Their pride had been heard round about. And there's lots of descriptions there. They were lofty, they were haughty, the text says. It's amazing in some ways. Sometimes Scripture will give us several descriptions so we see the whole picture. Now, this is one of those moments where I think he just chose lots of words to make sure we got the point. That they're proud, they're lofty, they're haughty. Those are all similar descriptions of the same problem. Now, they had become too proud of themselves, and even though they were aware of what other nations had suffered and faced and challenged. Notice with me then, skip down to verse 35. I'm sorry, verse 33. He said, and gladness and joy is taken away from the fruitful field, and from the land of Moab. And I have caused wine to cease from the wine presses. None shall tread with shouting. With shouting shall be no shouting at all. God says one of the first things that leaves when his judgment comes in this fashion is the joy and the peace and the happiness that people have grown so accustomed with. Well, what I want us to appreciate from that, and we can stop maybe and talk more about these kinds of things before we're done, but one of the things I want to appreciate about that is that some would argue that when you put God into an environment, that takes the joy and happiness and fun where? Out of that environment, right? We're constantly told that when you distance yourselves from God, then you have a better time, you're happier, you have more fun, you get all those things. God says when these folks distance themselves, they chose to rob themselves of joy and happiness. Because when my judgment comes, it's going to rob it. It's going to take it all away. And so they've been challenged in recognizing that the gladness and joy was going to be fleeting. When you defy God, he denies us of the joy and happiness that we might be pursuing as well. Now verse 35. Moreover, I will cause to cease in Moab, saith Jehovah, him that offereth in the high place, and him that burneth incense to his God. And so the question that is asked in your worksheets, what would the Lord cause to cease in Moab?
Offerings to idols.
Okay, so this idolatrous worship is going to stop. It's going to go away. All that trust and confidence they have placed in that process is done away with. And they're going to reap the consequences of that decision making and that behavior as well. Skip down to verse 42. And Moab shall be destroyed from being a people, because he hath magnified himself against Jehovah. I want you to think about that for a moment. He says, I'm going to destroy, you will not even be considered a people any longer. Some of you may escape, there may be remnants, there may be pieces that get, but you're not going to be known as a people any longer. That's how devastating the destruction that God is bringing against them is going to be, all because they had raised themselves up against Jehovah, the text says. But ultimately, according to verse 47, what's eventually going to happen?
Brings them on back.
Okay. I will bring back the captivity of Moab in the latter days, saith Jehovah. Thus far is the judgment of Moab. And so all your cities, all the areas, everything about Moab is getting judged because they had prided themselves in themselves. They trusted in Chemosh, their primary god, and they had spoken out against Jehovah. Judgment's coming. The difficulties they're going to face, and again left to a remnant that won't even be considered a people, who will be left after the captivity that God brings. Thoughts of things that I may have missed that you wanted to bring up or think about. I tried to just hit the verses that kept us moving through the text. A lot of them are just repeats of cities and things. Okay, jump to chapter 49. So now we're going to be dealing with a host of other nations and places, and in connection to the judgments that God is bringing in this particular moment. So again, we'll work through chapter 49 using both the worksheets, and we're going to look at a few maps along, or a map along the way as well. And so he turns his attention away from Moab, and who's he begin to speak to in chapter 49? To the Ammonites. Who are they?
They are the descendants of Lot again through the youngest daughter.
From the youngest daughter, okay? These are descendants from Lot and his youngest daughter, and their situation. If you go back into Genesis chapter 19 and verse 38. Genesis chapter 19 and verse 38. Notice he says, and the younger, she also bare a son, and called his name Benami. The same is the father of the children of Ammon unto this day. And so that's where they began their process of nation building, and that's the circumstances surrounding that group of individuals as well. So these are the Ammonites. Thus saith Jehovah, hath Israel no sons, hath he no heir? Why then doth Malcolm, who's that? Okay, that's their chief god, possess Gad, and his people dwell in the cities thereof. God basically says, who was Gad? One of the tribes, right? One of the tribes. And so why are you assuming possession of certain things? Why have you let this God rule over an area that really should have been maintained and kept by God's people? We dealt with Moab, okay? Moab is this area, and I'm going to circle it because you can't ever seem to see my pointer in the right place. If I can get it again. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. Hold on one second. Got it too. Focus. Angle. Get back there. Now you can see that. Oh. So,
Brian,
yeah.
is the mountain of the Amorite God also known as Molech?
Did not see that, so I can't answer that. I don't know where the mountain.
NIV uses the word Molech.
Yeah, it's possibly. I didn't come across that in my readings, so it's possible, but I didn't come across it in my readings.
Nebuchadnezzar, did he do Judah first, then did the Moabites, the Ammonites, or did he do just first? Because I know they're going back and forth here.
Yeah, I think you're dealing with after the fact issues, not and kind of during in some ways. And keep in mind, it's kind of all happening simultaneously as he moves southward and he comes down. And so, yeah, so Jeremiah's not necessarily talking about chronology as he is just this is what's going to happen to these nations in relationship to them. So that's Moab that's circled on your screen there. To the north then, this is Ammon. That's who we're dealing with now. Okay? These are the Ammonites that gathered. And remember, the tribe of Gad had stayed on the east side of the river, right? They were part them and who else?
Half tribes of Manasseh.
Tribe of Manasseh, right? Remember they had to go and
Fine.
they had to fight from where? Front row, okay? Remember they said, if you want to stay over here, you want to stay over here on this side of the river, that's fine. But you're not getting out of going over to conquest the promised land. And in fact, not only are you not getting out of it, your fighting men are going to the front lines. That's the only fair way to let you remain over on the east side of the river. And so then God says to them, what are you doing? He says to Ammon, the Ammonites, and to this Malcolm, this chief god, what are you doing? Where didn't Gad have descendants that could have stayed there and established that place? And so that's the imagery here, because that would have been the generic location where Gad would have been, I believe. Okay, back to the text. So we're dealing with the Ammonites at the outset, and their chief god. Notice verse 3. Wail, O Heshbon, for Ai. By the way, stop for half a second. When we think of Ai, what do we think of?
The God, the king that
The city.
Solomon was
Joshua goes over, right? Joshua goes over to conquest the land, and it's the first what? First loss, okay? It was the first loss because of Achan. That's exactly right. Not the same place. All that to tell you, not the same Ai. Okay. It's a different place. In fact, some translations, I don't know whether any of your modern English translations use the letters AR here or not to spell out this city's name. But everything I can read, this is not the same Ai that you were dealing with in those days. Especially because we're dealing with what? We're dealing with what nation? Ammon, right? We're dealing with Ammon. And where was Ai?
It was on the west side of
The one we're used to, it's on the other side of the river. Okay, so we're dealing with two different locations. Okay, two different places. Though it sounds familiar and spellings are saying two different locations. But Ai is laid to waste. Cry, ye daughters of Rabah. Gird you with sackcloths. Lament and run to and fro among the fences. For Malcolm shall go into captivity, his priests and his princes together. So one of the questions, or early questions for chapter 49 was, who was the God of the people of Ammon and what would happen to him? We kind of already answered it.
Malcolm and go
Okay.
into captivity.
Malcolm, and as most translations render it, and
They go into captivity.
that's right. And same thing we saw with Moab, right? In other words, he's just your false god, just as powerless as all the others, and he's not going to protect you, save you, help you. He's going into captivity right along with you in that sense. Who had they trusted in, according to verse 4?
Treasures.
Treasures.
And there was something else I want you to notice. Wherefore glorious thou in the what? In the valleys, thy flowing valley, O backsliding daughter that trusted in her treasure, saying, who shall come unto me? And so the beauty of their land and the possessions that they had and the treasures that they had, very similar to what Moab had been told. You have trusted in all the wrong things, and the consequence is coming because of that. Behold, I will bring a fear upon thee, saith the Lord. Jehovah of hosts, from all that are round about thee. Ye shall be driven out, every man right forth, and there shall be none to gather together the fugitives. I thought about that for a moment, how devastating this is when he comes and brings the judgment. He begins to drive them out. He says it'll be such a fierce driving out of the nation that there won't even be anybody left to what? Help whom?
Ones that are left.
Yeah, just to help the handful that might survive that. There's no guidance, no leadership left for those who might remain fugitives behind when this judgment comes. Again, a question you were asked: what would the Lord eventually do to these people?
Bring some back.
No, drive them
Okay,
out.
drive them out. Early on here, we're dealing with driving them out, right? He's going to drive them out, as we just read. So much so, again, that not even any leadership would be left for those who remain in that text. Notice with me verse 7. He said of Edom, thus saith Jehovah of hosts, is wisdom no more in Teman? Is counsel perished from the prudent? Is their wisdom vanished? Sometimes nations can skip right on by wisdom and counsel that they once embraced. Things that once measured them and guided them and strengthened them. Wisdom and counsel that once helped shape and mold their decision-making processes are cast aside. And this nation is crumbling, according to this verse, because they were rejecting the very wisdom and counsel that maybe at one point in time they would have listened to. And that can be said of any nation. When they've been given good counsel and wisdom over a period of time, it's amazing how some nations will run from the very thing that had strengthened them for a long period of time. But he says, what happened? What happened to all the wisdom, counsel, and guidance that your nation once saw? Verse 9. If grape gatherers came to thee, would they not leave some gleaning grapes? If thieves by night, would they not destroy till they had enough? But I have made Esau bare. I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is destroyed, and his brethren and his neighbors, and he is not. God gives a comparison here, and he says even a thief that comes to steal something might what?
Leave a little bit.
He'll probably just take what he wants to get his hands on as quickly as he can, and he'll depart. So he may leave. He'll leave certain things. If somebody comes in to glean the grapes out of the vineyard, they're probably going to be what?
Something like
There's always something left over. But what's God say about his judgment?
Nothing.
Would they not destroy till they had enough? But I have made Esau, all right, Esau, connection to Edom. Yeah, I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is destroyed, and his brethren and his neighbors, and he is not. And so we went from Ammon in the first part of the chapter, and we jumped to the Edomites. And the Edomites, as we just learned in that verse, were the descendants of Esau, Genesis 25 and verse 30. And they took part even in the destruction of Israel with the Chaldeans, where they're now going to suffer at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar as well. Edom, back to our map for just a moment. It's barely on the map, but it's down here to the south of Moab. It's where the Edomites were located, on the very bottom of your screen. And so here's this other nation. Ammonites, God's going to deal with. The Edomites, God's going to deal with. Each of them trusting in various things that were not helpful to them at all. And these folks that were descendants of Esau are facing the calamities and challenges that God was going to bring because of their decision making. And I want you to notice something though, verse 11. Leave thy fatherless children, I will preserve them alive, and let thy widows trust in me. It's an interesting little, and I don't know that we've seen this and any of the other judgments. But God basically says what about when He brings this judgment? What's God going to do?
Destroy everything.
Yeah, I'm going to take care of the most vulnerable. Children and the widows. God, if I'm reading this right, says, I'm going to don't worry about, leave thy fatherless children, I will preserve them alive. Let thy widows trust in me. It's one of the first times I think we've seen that kind of language where God, I don't know that He hasn't done that in other judgments. I just know this is one of the first times that we've seen Him actually verbalize it. That that's what I'm going to do. That some of the most vulnerable that's going to be kind of, you would think might get caught up in this challenge and condemnation that God is bringing. He says, I'm going to protect them and strengthen them through this difficulty. Jump to verse 16. Verse 16. As for thy terribleness, the pride of thy heart hath deceived thee. And thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, that holdest the height of the hill, though thou shouldest make thy nest as high as the eagle, I will bring thee down from them, saith Jehovah. And so He offers to you a couple of... Too much going on my screen tonight. I can't keep track of it all. And go back to your question sheets. That's what I'm trying to hit. To the people of Edom, could they go anywhere and run from the judgment of God? Verse 16. No. They could run to what?
Highest hills.
Run to the highest hills, go to the clefts of the rock, run wherever you want to run. You're not escaping this. Now, there's no place that God can't find you. And any confidence they might have that they would find enough safety is a misnomer. Notice with me again, verse 18 of this text. As in the overthrow of who? Sodom and Gomorrah. It's an interesting comparison, isn't it? And we run clear back to the days of Lot. Okay? We've been dealing with the nations that came out of Lot's circumstances, and now he runs back to that same time period again in a reference. When he says, as in the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighbor cities thereof, saith Jehovah, no man shall dwell there, neither shall any son of man sojourn there. Tremendous destruction that God is bringing to the Edomites. The challenges they're going to face because of their pride and their rejection of God. Jump down to verse 22. Behold, he shall come up and fly as the eagle, and spread out his wings against Masrah. And the heart of the mighty men of Edom at that day shall be as the heart of a woman in her pangs. And so there's a question that the worksheet asked in verse 22. What would become of their mighty men?
Become as women.
Okay. I'm glad you said that and not that. But their mighty men will become like women, and not just women in general, but specifically women giving birth, women in labor.
I interpreted that as they would be in pain.
Yeah. Misery, pain, all the things associated with the challenges of that kind of process. And these are supposed to be the strongest, mightiest men that your nation has. And I think the symbolism is very basic, and that is the strongest become weak and challenged. And those that you would think are invincible to pain or any challenges, they're not. And they're going to be met with the difficulties of God's judgment against them. Notice with me verse 24. He said, Damascus is waxed feeble. She turneth herself to flee, and trembling hath seized on her. Anguish and sorrows have taken hold of her, as of a woman in travail. Same language, different place. We've moved our attention now away from Edom to Damascus. I'm going to try bringing this map back up. Maybe I excuse me. So Damascus up here to the north. Okay? And Damascus was the chief city originally of Syria. That's correct. It's the chief city of Syria. And it had been challenged by everybody. The Syrians dealt with them, Babylonians dealt with them, the Medes dealt with them. The place had been faced by lots and lots and lots of challenges over time. And here is yet another challenge coming to them, this time because of the judgment that God was going to bring against Damascus. Notice verse 27. And I will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus, and it shall devour the palaces of Ben-Hadad. And so if you want to destroy a wall, then if you could set fire within it, you'll destroy what? The whole, right? You'll destroy the wall itself. And so God, I'm going to bring down your wall. I'm going to bring down the things that you relied upon, that you trusted in. In fact, that was one of the questions. If you run back to the question sheets again, notice he said, what would God kindle in Damascus? He set a fire in the wall. That which you think you can trust upon and rely upon will go away. I'm going to kindle a fire of destruction against Damascus. They won't be able to escape. He jumps to another group, verse 28, of Kedar and of the kingdoms of Hazor. Two different entities here. Kedar were the descendants of, they were the descendants of Ishmael. Go back to Genesis chapter 25, verse 13. Genesis chapter 25 and verse 13. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names, according to their generation. The firstborn of Ishmael, Nebiah, and Kedar, and Abiel, and Mibsam. And so here comes this other nation. He also mentions Hazor, which was a district, I believe, in Arabia. Hazor is the most difficult for me as I was looking these things up. It's the less specific of all of them that are noted. There's not a lot of specificity that we can look at and say, this is exactly where it was, and this is exactly who they are. It was much broader than that. But it's believed that they were a district in Arabia that God was dealing with in relationship to this just series of judgments, one after another, unto multiple places and cities and locations round about. And so, again, all the difficulties that they're facing because of their choices and decisions, and God is bringing judgment against them. Go back now to chapter 49. Watch your eyes. Okay. So, let me take you to verse 35. I'm sorry, verse 29. I want to miss one piece of the puzzle. So he mentions Damascus and Hazor, and then he said, or Kedar and Hazor, I should say. And notice verse 29. Their tents and their flocks shall they take. They shall carry away for themselves their curtains and all their vessels and their camels, and they shall cry unto them terror on every side. It appears that these folks are what?
Nomads.
Nomads, okay? These aren't folks that have a walled city like Damascus that you burn down. These aren't folks that are fortified in any way. But that doesn't mean you're any less vulnerable to the judgment of God. You reject Him, it doesn't matter whether you're living in tents or great cities. If God determines that you are worthy of judgment, I bring judgment, God says. And so your tents, your flocks, the things that you've been so trusting in, it's all gone away. Terror on what? On every side. In a walled city, generally you do what in order to take that city? Right, but you find generally a single point of entry, right? You generally try to find a single point of entry. When Babylon came down, it's believed that they basically diverted the water of the river that's running through, and you just created a tunnel. And so their means were able to go in. There's a sense of fortification in a walled city, and you may have a little more of a direct understanding of what approach your enemy is coming. You live out in the desert as nomads with tents. Where's the enemy coming from?
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Anywhere and everywhere. Okay, and that's the imagery here. Terror is on every side. Flee and wander off, dwell in the depths, O ye inhabitants of Hazor, saith Jehovah. For Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, hath taken counsel against you, and hath conceived a purpose against you. Judgment was coming to these folks as well. Now jump to verse 35. Thus saith Jehovah of hosts, behold, I will break the bow of whom? Elam. Elamites were descendants of, any guesses? They were descendants of Shem. You can look at that up in Genesis chapter 10 and verse 22. They were descendants of Shem. Who's he? No, son. Okay, so we're going clear back to kind of get an idea of where these folks, these Elamites, had descended from. So he brings a judgment upon them. Upon Elam will I bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven, and will scatter them toward all those winds, and there shall be no nation, whither the outcast of Elam shall not come. I will cause Elam to be dismayed before their enemies, and before them that seek their life, and I will bring evil upon them, even my fierce anger, saith Jehovah, and I will send the sword after them till I have consumed them. And so judgment is coming. And even, notice with me, that even in our supposed strengths, God is able to take us down. I want you to go back to verse 35. I meant to point something out to you. Again, watch your eyes for a second. Thus saith Jehovah of hosts, behold, I will break the what? The bow of Elam. They were known as archers. They were known for their great skills with the bow. And the point I want us to quickly recognize is, God says, I can defeat you even at your best. Even at your strongest. Ever watch what is that show with Bobby Flay? I Can Outcook Bobby Flay, or whatever that is, where they try to outcook Bobby Flay, and Bobby Flay never loses. Never mind. Yeah, no idea what I'm talking about. Anyway, the idea is that this person comes and challenges. Bobby Flay's this great cook, and they come and they bring their best dish, and he tries to beat them, fixing their best, and he always wins, even though it's supposed to be their best item that they could ever cook. God says, I can defeat Elam even in their strength. Even though they're great archers, even though they have great skills with bows and arrows, it doesn't matter. I can beat them even at their strongest, is the message that God wants them to appreciate. But what would he eventually do in the latter days? Verse 39.
Bring it back.
I'll love them to have come out of captivity as well. And so within this scope, in 2 chapters, we've dealt with condemnations against Moab, Ammon, Edom, Damascus, Kedar, Hazor, and now Elam. We have dealt with all of these varieties of nations. And then what's going to happen in chapter 50? Quick thought. Now we go back to Babylon. Okay? All these nations, Babylon's going to be used to do all these things that God wants. And then we come back in chapter 50 and we start talking about the prophecies against Babylon itself that God brings. He's going to use them for a period of time, but he's not going to excuse them for the things they've done against him as well. But there'll be time in our future studies to talk about that. In the last minute or so here, any leftover thoughts, lessons that you picked up on that I didn't?
It all comes down to God is cleansing the land all the way down, clear down the
Yeah. it's an amazing picture when you think about it, that he's not really leaving any stone unturned. We dealt with Philistia, we dealt with Egypt, okay, we dealt with the coastline, we've dealt with Judah and Israel in the middle, we've dealt with the eastern side, the Ammonites and the Edomites and the Moabites and all these. And then we're also going to deal with the great empire of Babylon. And eventually it's going to fall. And while all this is happening, by the way, just to give you a quick reminder, who's talking to Babylon about what's coming?
Daniel.
Daniel is, okay? Keep that in perspective. All the while these events are going on, and Jeremiah is prophesying these things to down in Judah and Egypt, or wherever they happen to have to flee to, Daniel has been taken back captivity, and he and guys like Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, they're dealing with it from the Babylonian side. And Daniel's bringing the prophecies as well against Babylon and the weaknesses that eventually be exposed against them. So don't forget about that. That Daniel is a contemporary to these things. The events of Daniel are happening in the same time frame that these events are occurring.
Nobody's exempt from the punishment.
Yeah, yeah. All right, Lord willing, we'll come back to chapter 50.
Y'all understood with the Babylonians what the Israelites were to have done when they first went into the land.
Yeah. And I don't know that we'll get much past chapter 50 Sunday, so you can probably just look at it and fairly suitable for Sunday's discussion.